Good morning. We're on Shevuot stuff 11a, top line, fourth word. Alamayata. So the Gemara has been discussing machlokus between Rav Chizda and Rabbah about whether kashim has kedushas haguf or kedushas mammon. If it has innate sanctity, which is attached to the body of the thing, or is strictly a financial consideration. In other words, the ownership of it belongs to Hekdesh and it has Kedusha. Obviously, if it's just ownership, then it would be easier to remove such sanctity. Elmeata. So if it's true that the Ketores has only Kedushas Damim, right, the ownership sanctity, Loti possible Tful Yom, then if a Tful Yom touches it, a Tful Yom is someone who is finished with his term of Tuma, let's say a Mitzvah, for example, 7 days is up, but he still has to wait till dark and go to the mikvah to complete the process. So if he's no longer really if he's just in the category of Tful Yom, it shouldn't be, if it's only Kedushas Damim, then that should not be enough. Contact with such a person should not be enough to make it a puzzle for kachim. Alamatanya, so maybe that's the case, but no, we have a brisa that says, once the incense was placed in the mortar to be mixed and ground, nifselas b'tful yom, then it's already, then if it's touched by tful yom, it becomes puzzle. But if it's only monetary sanctity, that shouldn't be the case. So what are you going to say? That no, the rule is that a tful yom touches anything that has only kedushas damim, it still becomes puzzle, but that's not the case. Vatnan hamanachos molin behen mishahukdeshu. A mincha it can become it can be subject to meila, meaning it's also to be used for some other purpose, or by someone who is outside of hekdesh, misha kedushu, from the time that they are made kadosh, by the time they're dedicated by the owner, right? You say this flower is going to be for a mincha, then they're subject to milah, kashu b'chli, and once they go into a kli shares, hushruly possible tful yom, then they can become even possible by being touched by tful yom. Uva mechusar kippurim, or someone who it's the same kind of thing, but a person who still has to bring a korban to complete his whatever tuma he's trying to recover from, ubalina, or through being kept overnight, which is not permitted. So kashu b'chli in. So this implies that from the time that it's donated, it has to be, that's not enough to make it subject to being possible from its full yom. It has to actually go into a klisharis, and then it becomes kadosh. The goof becomes kedushas haguf. Then the thing itself, the flower itself, becomes kadosh. It's not just the ownership, which can be changed by saying this flower is for a mincha, but that doesn't affect the thing itself. It affects its ownership. So lo kachu b'chli lo, but until it comes into the klisharis, it's not possible by being touched by its full yom. So you see, it's the case that if something that is only kedushas damim cannot be made possible by being touched by its full yom, and yet we saw that the ketores is indeed made possible by a tvul yom from the time it's put into the mortar, and the mortar is not a klisharis. So Gemara says Elamai, so what? So now you're going to say, what kind of kedusha does it have? Kedushas hagufi. You want to think that the ketores has kedushas haguf, elmeata tipasel belina. Then it should be subject to an expiry date, right? That once, if it stays overnight without being used, then it becomes puzzle. But that's not the case. Alamatzanan, but we have a brisa. Hakomet falavona. Rest all these incense things. Minchas kohanim, minchas kohanim mashuach, mincha of kohanim, or the kohen gadol, minchas nesachim. Molim b'hen mishahukdeshu. You can do me'ila on them once they're set aside and designated for this use. And once they go into the Kli Sharis, really possible b'Tfil Yom, then they can become possible through a Tfil Yom, U'Mchuser Kippurim, U'Belina, right? Or through staying over, being left overnight. So the Kadshu b'Chli'in, that only counts if it only becomes subject to Lina if it's already been put into a Kli Sharis. Lo Kadshu b'Chli Lo. But if it hasn't yet been put into a Kli Sharis, then it's not subject to Lina. So if you want to say that um, uh, so it's clear that putting it into the mortar, into machtashas, does not make it subject, give it kedushas haguf. Amalei, so Rabbi can answer, Lina Kamros. Wait, you're talking about Lina? That doesn't prove anything because Shani Ktaras has different rules about Lina. Why? Because um, it's a little unclear exactly what this means, but basically the Ketores was prepared once a year, right? You'd need 300 and I think 367 or 368 measures of Ketores. They were all prepared at the beginning of the year at one time, and then it was used all year. So the whole procedure for Ketores indicates that it's not subject to Lina, right? Because the procedure by design includes Lina, includes that you make it in advance for the whole year. So you can't. So Taurus must be different. You can't say that once you've ground the Taurus, it's subject to Lina. Clearly, that's not the case. So it's only when the when you have it's Lina. Taurus has different rules for Lina, basically. So you can't apply one to the other. We're on 11A, about a little more than halfway down. Mikol Makom Kasha, but still there's a question of Kedusha ben Leichan Halcha. We still have the question, like what happens to the Kedusha? Like how can you say that that Ketores can be redeemed um, if it has kedusha saguf and it doesn't have a mum, so where does the kedusha go? Or Rabba leiv beis din masna leim. Here we have the concept that that it's conditional. When you give it kedusha, it's conditional on the leiv beis din, on the intentions imposed or expected by the beis din, right? So in other words. Um, you're treating the designation of Ketores as if it were unconditional, as if it were, that makes it kadosh, but there actually are conditions under which the designation is assumed to be undone. Im husruchu, husruchu. If they're needed for for a carbon seabor, then they're needed, and then they get their kedushas hakuf la. But if they're never needed, yulad may, and then kedushas hakuf doesn't take effect, and it's only kedushas damim. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye says v'hamaru di amar, but you yourself said hikdish zachar l'damav. If you take a male animal and you say, I'm making this hektish, but only its value for its monetary value, but it's an animal which could be used on the mizbeach. It's not effective. Kadosh kedushas haguf. You can't make it conditional. You can't say I'm making this conditionally kadosh. Like it's for now, it's only for kedushas damim, but if you want to make it kedushas guf, you can. No, we don't say that. We say if it's an animal that could go on the mizbeach and you make it hekdesh, it's got kedushas aguf. So why don't you say the same for the ktaros? Lo kasha. Mar says no, not a problem. Hadi amar l'dmei olah, hadi amar l'dmei nisachim. If you say that I want this animal to be kadosh kedushas damim, and the money, the value that it has should be used for an ola. No, that doesn't work to make it only kedushas damim. Then the thing itself can be an ola, so it's kedushas haguf, right? But if you say if you say I'm donating this cow. Um, but I'm only donating it for the monetary value, which I would like to be used for something else in the mikdash, for nesachim, for wine, to buy wine or something else on these behalf. So then we do not say that it's an automatic kedusha saguf. Okay, Eisvei Abai. Bias. Parvis Yom Kippurim Shavdu. What about the sacrifices of Yom Kippur? They were designated and they got lost. You okay? What are you going to do? You have to find a substitute. You find a substitute. Or if you have a carbon that's to atone for avodah zara of the tzibur, and you buy the sacrifice and you designate it, and then they get lost. And then so what do you have to find another one to substitute for it, and then you find the originals, right? So kulan yomusu, none of them can be used for the carbon. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, they all are put out to pasture until they die. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon say yiru ashistavu. Um, um, so I'm sorry. So not put out to pasture, but you actually deprive it of food or anything until it dies. You starve it to death. Whereas Rabbi Elazar and Shimon say no, you can let them live normal lives until they get a mum, and then or then they can be sold. V'yiplu d'mein lundava, and their value can be used for hekdesh. Ein chatas tzibur mesa, because we don't allow a chatas of the tzibur to we don't like leave it to die. VMI, but if that's the case, then lema leiv based in masnaleim. If you want to take this idea that well the kedusha is only conditionally applied, why don't you say the same thing about this chatas, right? That it doesn't have kedushas haguf yet. If it turns out that we're get to actually bring it to the mizbeach, then the kedushas haguf, is applied to it. But if something happens and it gets lost, then we're saying that it only had kedushas damim in the first place, so you don't get into this whole thing. Um, so Rabba would answer, Avudin Kamras. What? You're talking about lost animals. Shani Avudin lo shlichet. No, it doesn't happen very often. So we can say that something that happens frequently or regularly is something that Leiv Beis Masnalam applies, right? That like an assumption applies, but if it's something that's a rare event, there are no assumptions about rare events. But Abai would answer, no, Hari Parad lo shlicha. What about the paraduma? The whole idea of a paraduma, it rarely happens, right? I think the Gemara says like in the whole time of the Bate Mikdash, there were like 7 or 9 or something. Like it's a rare event. And then the Tanya, we have a Brisa, para niftes al kol psul shaba. Paraduma can be redeemed for any psul, any mum that it has. Mesa tipada, if it dies, it can be redeemed. Nishchata tipada, um, if the shchita was done outside of the proper place, then it can be redeemed. Matzah cheres na'imana tipada. If you just find a nicer one, right? You have a paraduma, it's all you've designated, it's all set to go, and then somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I got a bigger one, a nicer one." Then you can just exchange it. You not use the first one. You can redeem it. Shchata al pi agabe marachta. But once you did the shchita on the maracha, on the wood pile, and then it can't be redeemed ever, which is saying that's kedushas haguf. So in other words, it looks like Leif Beis in Masnaleim is operative here, right? Because you designated the paraduma, and then you can switch it, right? It must be that it's Leif Beis in Masnaleim, but the whole idea of a paraduma is rare. So certainly the need to exchange one is even more rare. So if you want to say Leif Beis in Masnaleim only applies to regular events, what about this? This is certainly not a regular event. More answers, Shani Para. Paraduma is different. It's not really kedusha samizbeach, right? I mean, think about it. The paraduma wasn't even the avoda for if you want to call it the avoda. It wasn't the procedure. The ritual wasn't done in the Beis Hamikdash. It was done outside, bachutz. So you can't say that it's it's there's no. If it had kedusha saguf, it would have to be. Um, burned in the mikdash, and yet that's not the case. It's one of the many odd or even paradoxical things about the paraduma. Like the whole thing is not a typical carbon. So you could say that there's that one of the exceptions or one of the things in which a paraduma is not treated like anything else is that it never has kedushas haguf until until it's actually, as the Gemara said, slaughtered on the maracha. But until then, it's kachi bedek. It's not. It doesn't qualify for kedushas haguf in the first place. But if that's the case, Mesa Nishlata Tipada, that if it died or was slaughtered in the wrong place, it can be redeemed. Habinan Hamada V'Haracha. Um, it you can't, like, if it's dead, you can't. In order to be redeemed, what's one of the rules of redeeming a kachim? You have to stand it up in the to be assessed, right? Well, this one's dead; it can't be assessed anymore. So we're how can you consider it something that can be redeemed if it's already dead? Hamane. So who is this according to? Rabbi Shimon. He said that, yeah, generally things that are kachim have to be stood up in order to be evaluated. It's for redemption, but kachim mizbeach were part of that rule. And kachim bedekabayis lo hayu b'chlal hamadav haracha, but that never applied to kachim for bedekabayis, for the general temple fund. So it's not a problem to say that you could redeem it after it's dead. Since it's, if you're saying it's only kachi bedek in the first place. Rabbi Shimon, but if we're going according to Rabbi Shimon and Maseifa, what about the rest of the brayso? Shchatu al gabe marachta. If once you slaughtered it on the maracha, ein lapedia elamis, then it can never be redeemed, right? So why not? Isn't it just kachi bedek habayis? Vatanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, para metama tumas ochlin. The para duma it can become tame as food because there was a moment when it was possibly edible. In other words, once you did the shlita, it still could be eaten. It's not yet, a paraduma that can't be redeemed. Rabbi Rish Lakish explained, Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon held paraniftes al gavi marachta. It can be redeemed even once it was slaughtered on the maracha. So our brisa isn't like Rabbi Shimon. Ela shani para hoil v'domei yukari. Now, we'll say is different about paraduma since it's very expensive. That's why. Um, uh, so ordinarily we would say it's a rare event and lave based in Masnalayan doesn't apply. But in this case, we do say that the based in lave based in Masnalayan, that the condition applies. You know why? Because it's so expensive, right? You probably recall the story of Dama ben Nesina, who wouldn't wake up his father to sell or for selling something to the Mikdash, and he lost out on a lot of money. And his reward was he had a paraduma born to his flock, and so he sold that for a lot of money. So he didn't end up losing any money. So the point is, since it's so expensive, leiv besim masalem, even in a rare case, because we want to forestall these large financial losses. Okay. Amar, we said before, Mesa tipada. If paraduma dies, it can be redeemed. Well, wait a minute. If you redeem it, then you can do anything with it, right? You can even feed it, use it as dog food, right? Do we do that? Do we something that was once kachim? Can we use it for anything we want, even something degrading? Like once you've been poda, you can use it for anything. So how could we allow it to be nifta? Amar Rabbi Sharsha mishum ora. It can be redeemed just for the leather, right? Just for the skin, to use the leather. So you can't use the meat, but you can redeem it for the leather. For kind of based in masnu adata daoro, like that really, like you want to say that there's lave based in masna aleim just for the leather and not for the meat. That seems a little unusual. Amar Avkana, Amrainche migamla una. From a camel, even the ear is valuable. In other words, even the hide of a paraduma is very valuable. Maybe, its color, maybe it was a very desirable kind of material to make leather. So you could still say leiv based in masaleim, just the skin and not the meat. Amar Kana. Sorry, just said that. Esve. Okay, so back to our original statement, which is that Lev Beis Masna Lehem, Esfe, they asked Rabbah, Amru Lo Rabbi Shimon. They said to Rabbi Shimon, Maushi Karvu Zeh Bozeh. Can you exchange one musaf, carbon musaf, for another one? In other words, you had one thing that's supposed to be the musaf for Rosh Chodesh, and one that's supposed to be musaf for Shabbos, and can you swap them? Amar lahu, yikru. Yeah, that's fine, no problem. Amar lo ho vein kaparas on shava, heach hein karevin. But the nature of their of the kapara that it offers is different. So, like, how can you use one for the other? This one was supposed to be a musaf for Shabbos, and you want to use it for musaf for Rosh Chodesh. It's like a different animal. You might say it's a different thing. How can you swap them? Amar lahen, kulan b'nei l'chaper al tumas mikdash v'kashav. No, they're all intended for the same thing. Every musaf is a kapara for the tuma of the that's brought into the Beis Hamikdash. So you can swap them. VMI, if Rav is right, then why did Rav Shimon say lema lev beis and masna leim? You could have said, you didn't have to go to that. You could have said, you know what? When you designate the korban for this musaf is for Shabbos, it's conditional, right? If I decide to swap it for Rosh Chodesh, then it's fine. Why don't you say that's a built-in condition? So where it says Rabbi Shimon Kamras, like you're talking about Rabbi Shimon Leiv based in Masna Leim. He doesn't have this idea. He doesn't believe that there is a conditional designation. Tamidin shlehutzricha l'tzibur. You have a carbon tamid that was designated, but then you didn't end up needing it. Like you designated a bunch of animals for tamidim, and and time's up. The tamid you already had more than you needed. So Ladiva Rabbi Shimon and niftin tamimim. According to Rabbi Shimon, you can't. You have to wait until they get a mum. You can't redeem them. Ladivrei chachamim niftim tamimim. According to the chachamim, you can. So in other words, Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of this slave based in Mastala, and that's why he says you can't redeem them until they get a mum. Whereas the rabbis who say slave based in Mastala applies, they understand that there was a original conditional donation, and so the fact that you didn't need them in the end means that they can be redeemed. They did not get kedusha saguf in the first place. And we will stop here for today and pick it up tomorrow. Have a good day.